Welcome to your in-depth weekly astrology overview and zodiac forecast for week beginning the 25th of August. I'm going to share some standout details to look out for to begin with. Then on screen, the event chart right at the start of the week, which always provides an influential backdrop for the following 7 days. I'll then go through each of the key influences frame by frame to give a clear picture of what we can collectively expect. Please stay with me to the end. I'll then go through each of the 12 zodiac signs from Aries through to Pisces to give you a flavour of what you can look forwards to in terms of your ascendant, sun or the moon. Monday's a big day this week. Mercury ends its post-retrograde shadow. Now we know that Mercury went direct on the 11th of August, but if we go all the way back to the 30th of June, that's when Mercury really started to slow down, because retrograde season lasts 10 weeks. The actual retrograde is around about 21 days. So if there have been some tangles around communication, the chances are things can be unravelled as we come into this week. But we do have Venus arriving into the sign of Leo also on Monday. Venus in Leo can be very social, likes to bring a bit of drama to the way we connect to others. What's that going to mean? Because Venus is forging some complex other interplanetary relationships. A very good one to Saturn and also Neptune, along with Uranus, but a much more challenging one potentially to Pluto. Now, as this week goes on, Mars in the sign of Libra clashes with Jupiter in Cancer. I need to explain that to you because alongside that, Mercury, which is getting to the end of its journey in Leo, also is edging towards a square with Uranus, and that can create a lot of brittleness but also a lot of tension. Now on the screen now I'm showing the event chart right at the start of the week. We always need to be mindful of the two luminaries. The moon has come out of that new moon with the sun, which occurred last Saturday, but is still in Virgo. The significance is that maybe we enter this week wanting to be a bit more virtuous. And of course, the sign of Virgo is ruled by Mercury, which is unravelling from that post-retrograde shadow. But if we think about the big picture of this week, we are emerging from a new moon. New moons give us a chance to set our intentions. The sign of Virgo, where it's occurred, the black moon, because it was the second new moon within the month of August, is really encouraging us to be more mindful of the practical strands in our situations, but also how we might in some ways make some small but very important changes which helps us to make our lives run that much more efficiently. So we could think about marginal gains. It's just as we come into this week, the sun is in a jarring quincunx with Pluto, but also with Saturn and Neptune. So the sun essentially is a finger of God, a yod, the sun at the point of that. Now, because Virgo can be about providing services, Pluto in Aquarius is much more interested in how we all connect and communicate. Saturn in the sign of Aries in particular is about our identity. So we're not really going to find it particularly easy, I feel, to perhaps focus on where we might be more conscientious because of those competing energies. But as I mentioned before, Venus has moved into Leo. Now, if you are someone who wants to balance the earnest energies of the sun and initially the moon this week of Virgo with having some playtime, well, Venus moving into this area is certainly for you. So if you want to mix and mingle with people through to the 19th of September, certainly a great opportunity to do that. But Venus in Leo can also make us quite prideful about our connections, and also can see us perhaps more comparing the people we're spending time with, which can be a little bit of a negative. I feel that Venus in Leo can be somewhat vain. So that's something to be mindful of, but it does forge a very lively link to Uranus. So if you're wanting to bring some electricity and spontaneity into your love life, it may require you to meet up and connect to people. But in any ongoing relationship, because Venus in Leo goes into a direct opposition, which is exact on Wednesday, with Pluto, the tiny power broker of the Zodiac, if we feel that someone's leveraging a relationship, so in other words, tempting us with intimacy or money through flattery, laying on the charm, that's something we need to be a little bit cautious around. But equally, because Pluto can be about motivations, if we are drawn towards someone, the chances are it can be a hot attraction, and it could be with a friend. But we just need to be mindful if that's the case. Where will the friendship go if the romantic dalliance doesn't endure? Now, as the week goes on, as I mentioned before, Mars, which is very much about thrust, action, and us as individuals, even if it is in the sign of relating, which is Libra, is clashing with Jupiter in the feeling sign of Cancer. One of the dangers with this particular, dangers is perhaps a strong word, but we could promise more than we can realistically deliver. So it's going to be very important if we're talking to people, particularly around a contractual matter, whether it's a bit more informal, what we're agreed to do with a friend's needs, or whether it is something to do with our professional world. It's important that we don't over egg the proverbial pudding. And also because Mercury is edging towards the end of its journey through Leo, which of course has been long lasting, we may feel a bit agitated with its right angle to Uranus. So important towards the end of this week, particularly with the virtue of Virgo, that we stay mindful of what other people expect of us, stay mindful of our physical and practical welfare in terms of sleep, diet, exercise and rest, but also as much as it's good to do things for others and be someone who's a solid citizen, it's also important to balance that with our own needs. And I feel that Mars in Libra is asking us to stay very strong on our boundaries, and I also feel that the opposition between Venus and Pluto suggests that if we are getting drawn towards someone, we are mindful of what our motivations are. Sometimes, for example, if people both want the same things, even if it is a fleeting clinch, if that's the deal, that's fine. But if one person wants a lifelong relationship and the other person's a bit of a user, that can cause some issues. So the sign of Virgo is very much the heart of this week, but there are lots of competing influences, as you can see. I'm astrologer Patrick Arundell. Thank you so much for joining me. If you've yet to subscribe to the channel, please do so now and continue to help it to thrive. If you're a member or a patron, thank you. If you'd like to become one, please click on the link beneath this video. My new website at patrickarundell.com, it has taken some time. It is a big website and we are continuing to make refinements. Please stay with us on it and you'll see there's lots of new information being shared all the time. And you can also download your free natal chart. You can enjoy the three card tarot, which is brilliant, or you can sign up for your free daily horoscope fired to your device each morning. Finally, if you'd like to work with me directly, please check out my testimonials below, because what people say about working with me is incredibly humbling, but it does also make me very quietly proud. Please see below for more. So Aries, your week beginning, the 25th of August begins with Venus, the relator, but also the planet of beauty and charm, moving into the most glamorous part of your scope through to the end of week 2 of September. This opens up a celestial window of potential pleasure, really important connections, not least the dazzling link to Uranus, which occurs straight away, suggests there could be some surprises if you're single and not with great expectations of who you may encounter, you may actually just bump into someone where the chemistry is just very lively from the off. Now, because you do have Saturn and Neptune in your sign, also aligning to Venus and Uranus too, it's also a chance to balance the more potentially social vibe with just being in touch with being grounded and keeping your expectations real. But what does happen as this week goes on, particularly with Mercury now emerged from its shadow, also in the 5th house like Venus, Venus does go into a face-off with Pluto. Don't be surprised if it's someone in your social circle that you start to find somewhat irresistible. Now, whether you actually have a conversation or not is another matter. Perhaps the energy of Pluto can be a little bit more of an obsession, but I don't mean that in an unkind way. You may just find it very difficult to get one particular person out of your thoughts. Now, because Mars, your ruler, is continuing his journey through your sector of relating, this is very, very lovely for you. You get a lot of very supportive influences here. It's just that Jupiter, in a more emotional part of your scope, does square up with Mars in the second half of this week. What I would say in ongoing relationships is that if things aren't quite as you exactly would like, try not to let frustration get the better of you. Because with Mercury also edging towards the exit of the sign of Leo, it does start to get into a right angle with Uranus. And if your nervous system starts to get overactivated, that could spoil a potentially promising situation. Every relationship, every part of life goes through cycles. And because the sun and the moon at the start of this week are asking you to be more mindful of practicalities, if you are in an ongoing tie that has lost its luster, it's not quite as spontaneous as it was before, the one thing you can do is to try to surprise your partner, and a good way to do that may be through some thoughtful gestures, even around who does and contributes what to the domestic situation. But if you have felt a little bit rigidly tied to some of life's routines, I think this week is really provoking you in some ways to challenge that by spending more time with other people, even if it's people you perhaps work with. And if you are single, don't be surprised if there is that connection with someone in the most mundane of places possible. Taurus, your week beginning the 25th of August, has some contrasts. Venus, your ruler, moves into a part of your chart which is very much to do with your appreciation of your home. You may find yourself keen to beautify your residency right through to the 19th of September. For some bulls, that may even be moving home altogether. But if you are redecorating or adding some new home furnishings, all of that can give you that lovely sense of comfort. And sensual security, very important to Taurus people. But late last week we did have a dazzling black moon. Dazzling because of the square with Uranus. So you could come into this week actually wanting to be a bit freer with your resources. In fact, you may be in the mood to speculate. So if you are someone who's interested in trying to squeeze more from your assets, but you're open to looking at things in a fresh way, I feel the square between the black moon but also Uranus can urge you to open the purse strings. But for some people, it may be that you just want to add extra luxury to your home environment. Now, Venus moving into the 4th house also suggests, with the sun and the moon at the start of this week in more social areas, that if you do get together with people, you may want to do so in the comfort of your abode. And that may come from spoiling people, playing host, but really laying on some lovely food and fussing over their needs in every way possible. That's absolutely delicious. But also, Jupiter, the planet of growth, continues his journey in your third house, and that's helping you to perhaps think about your values, your philosophies, and in relation to your home. But Jupiter does come into conflict with Mars in the latter part of this week, and with Mercury also edging towards the end of its journey in Leo, even though Venus has just arrived, that can create a little bit of tension in its emerging right angle with Uranus. And because Venus also goes face to face in an exact opposition with Pluto at the heart of this week, if you are thinking about marketing a property, it is going to be important that it does have its presentational virtues maximized in order to amp up the value that you're going to create in terms of the wider world. But in a personal relationship that's been ongoing, it may even be with a family member, if you're feeling that someone isn't tuned into you enough in terms of what you need, part of the reason for that, Taurus, may be because of Chiron, Saturn and Neptune, all in retrograde in your 12th house, which is very psychological, but also Pluto in the 10th house is really where we're connecting to the world, but also where we're perhaps wanting the support of family members, older family members, or perhaps our management, who we work for. And if you're feeling that it's not quite as supportive as you would like, or not indeed as enjoyable as you would like, I feel that Venus's opposition with Pluto can give you a lot of food for thought as this week goes on. So it's important to have some fun for us all, but I do feel that there are those competing sensitivities for you that you're needing to check into, and that is going to be something that's very important through this last week of August, whilst Saturn does retain its presence still in your 12th house. Next week, he's going to invert back into your sector of friendship, where he will be through to the middle of February. But for now, if you do find yourself refining some of your connections to others, particularly if you feel that not everyone is quite as sensitive as they could be, it wouldn't be a complete surprise. Gemini, your week beginning the 25th of August sees your sparkling ruler Mercury emerging from its post-retrograde shadow on Monday. If you recall, from the middle of July through to the 11th of August, Mercury was retracing its steps in a retrograde in the proud sign of Leo. You may have encountered some frustrations around communications, there may have been some cross wires, but also there may have been some technology snags too. Now, once Mercury stationed direct, some of those may have resolved. But as Mercury gets back to the degree of where the retrograde began, now you can really start to gain traction. Further, on Monday, Venus, the relator, joins up with Mercury in the proud but charming sign of Leo. If you have got something you're very excited about sharing, an idea, or you want to step up your interactions with others, you can be very spontaneous at the start of this week, because Venus connects to the electric energies of Uranus in your sign. You could find yourself getting in touch with a family member, someone you used to live near that you haven't spoken to for some while, because the Sun is urging you to be in touch with your more emotional bearings, but your communication can reflect the conversations. Now, at the heart of this week, Venus does go face to face with Pluto. This can give you an even greater ability to be very persuasive, but it's also important to understand somebody could try to be very persuasive towards you. So if you're discussing a contract, perhaps it's someone you're really drawn towards, it is going to be important for all of us to try to understand what the motive may be. Now, Jupiter continues its journey through your second house, which can be fortunate for you through to the end of June when it comes to everyday finances. But this week forges a square as the week goes on with the dramatic action planet of Mars. So you may find that you want to splash out, and it could be for something for your home. But that urge to spend or speculate may be quite hard to resist. Also, you could be very generous and find it very difficult not to be very much in the moment. But also as the week goes on, Mercury is edging towards the exit in the sign of Leo, where it's been for so long, and starts to forge a very abrasive, tense link with Uranus in your sign. So even though you can gain traction this week, if conversations don't go quite as you hope or people aren't quite as receptive, you could start to feel yourself getting a little bit frustrated and maybe even irritable. So I think for all of us this week, as the week goes on, it is going to be really important to understand that if we try to force things, it's likely going to be a little bit counterproductive. But if there is someone you want to meet up with, someone you want to enjoy their company with, you want to have a more interactive time socially, Venus moving into Leo will certainly give you the opportunity to do that. But with the Sun and also the energy from the new moon in Virgo, you're just being asked to stay very much in touch with how things feel, as much as enjoying the excitement of those very fast moving conversations. Cancer, your week beginning the 25th of August sees the energy of the black moon, the new moon in your sector of everyday communications, still very potently to the fore. You could be thinking or talking about long-term finances or about your career. But if you are wanting to get an instant uplift in terms of finances, you could get it with Venus moving into Leo on Monday, and also Mercury emerging from a very stilted period which began towards the end of June. You may have throughout that entire time been grappling with how to get the foundations of your world, particularly around everyday money, working quite as sweetly as you would like. Now through to the 19th of September, some genuine financial fortune could fall for you. But if you are unsure about the work you're already in, and it's not giving you the mental stimulation and the satisfaction that you really deserve, it may not be so much about everyday money that you're thinking about. It's more of where you'll feel at ease in terms of how you make your living. So all of that can be very much to the fore. And with Jupiter in your sign, urging you to take direct action in its square with Mars in the second half of this week, you could be a little bit, surprisingly for you, impatient to take a step forwards. But I would say if you need a little longer to evaluate the pros and cons of a key financial decision, or it may be a key emotional or even romantic involvement, do give yourself the opportunity beyond the scope of this week. Leo, your week beginning the 25th of August may have seen you recently feeling very nostalgic, and that's made it much more difficult to be in the moment. It may have been past relationships, people who are no longer with us, or perhaps you've just needed some time out to reflect, perhaps even to embrace some healing. But at the very start of this week, an idea that started to germinate in the back of your mind towards the end of June can really start to gain traction. Also, Venus moves into your sign. If you have been doubting yourself or asking questions about a relationship matter, you can feel so much more alluring. In fact, your confidence is given a significant boost right through to the 19th of September with Venus in your sign. If you decide to give yourself some kind of glamorous makeover, your timing is perfect. But also Venus aligns briefly but powerfully with the electric energies of Uranus. I feel Venus being in your own sign could, particularly if you're single, see more than one person be drawn to you right through to that end of that second week of September. But something could happen quite quickly this week, which really can give you quite the buzz. But also, as this week goes on, Jupiter, which retains its status in a more sheltered area, does go into a chaffing right angle with Mars in your third house. There may be something that's still a little bit delicate that you need to talk about, but it could be a contractual matter, because the new moon at the end of last week was in your second house, but was in a awkward angle to Pluto in your sector of relating, but Saturn and Neptune in the contractual part of your chart. So if you've been waiting to hear news about something, with Jupiter squaring off to Mars, you could start to get a little bit frustrated. Also, towards the end of this week, Mercury starts to go into an edgy right angle with Uranus, and that also can add some brittleness. So it's important to just let that energy of Venus, Mercury speeding up, to work its magic and let things unfold without trying too hard. You do have a natural way, a radiance which is going to be increased this week. Have confidence, set your intentions about how things may go, because if you're waiting for news from someone else, there may still be somewhat of a delay. And perhaps part of this is because what you want from a situation is not quite what they want, and there may still be more discussion to be had. So with that rather tense link between Mercury and also Uranus at the end of this week, if you do let the frustration get the better of you, it could spoil still a very promising time for you. Virgo, your week beginning the 25th of August makes me think of one word: complex, because the sun now back in your sign and you're surfing the energy of the black new moon in Virgo is pushing you to be very dynamic, move into the moment, do what's right for you, the individual. And yet Venus joins up with your ruler Mercury at the start of this week in a much more reflective area. So it's almost like one foot's in the present, but part of you could still be in the past, which of course is because the sun has just emerged from a very tender, sensitive area where Mercury's been since the end of June, going through that retrograde. So there's been a lot of soul searching, and as much as we may say the new moon in your sign gives you the chance to charge forwards very dynamically, I feel that this week is going to encourage you to feel your way into the situation. Now, part of this could come around relationships. You might start to think a lot about someone from your past, but equally, if you're in a relationship that's not working very well, Venus moving into the 12th house can see you really thinking and considering what to do right through to the 19th of September. But this is a week also when Jupiter, in a very friendly part of your scope, is in a challenging right angle with Mars as the week goes on. If you are thinking about doing something bold and decisive around finance, or you're working with a friend or collaboratively, don't get too caught up in wanting to take instant action. Part of your gift is that you do analyse, that you do weigh things up. Now, next week, Mercury is going to move into your sign, and I feel that that's going to be very helpful to you. But something could still be a little bit stressful this week, particularly if you're trying to weigh up the benefits or perhaps the challenges of making a big change, because very often Virgo people have a preference for a structure, a way of working, and at the moment something that has worked for you for a long time may be in question. You may be considering a completely new direction but not quite feel ready to make the move. And I think next week, with Mercury's arrival in Virgo, you're going to find it much easier to be in the moment. Libra, your week commencing the 25th of August, I feel we'll see a lot of astrologers putting the emphasis on Venus, your ruler, moving into the most sociable part of your chart and all the benefits that can bring through to the 19th of September. Well, that's true, but we also need to take into account the big picture. So the sun has moved into a more sheltered part of your scope, but is clashing at the start of this week with Saturn and Neptune in your sector of relating, and also Pluto in your sector of romance is not aligning so well to the sun. So the sun is asking you to be in touch with your deeper spiritual needs, And as much as Venus is moving into this much more interactive, playful area, forging a great link with Uranus, to be fair, at the very start of this week, also with Mercury emerging from its shadow after scudding backwards and forwards through your social sector since the end of June, maybe there will be some connections that you can have this week which are great fun. You may even have a very, very charismatic and even magnetic connection to someone at the heart of this week, which will be hard to resist. But it's also possible that that connection may for now need to be a little low key or even somewhat secret because of the sun being in the 12th house. So as much as we can think about Venus bringing some real dividends for you in Leo, which she certainly can, I just feel that there's a deeper strand in your situation which is more protective. Now, of course, Mars is still in your sign and is forging a right angle to Jupiter towards the end of this week. And if your focus is much more about making progress professionally, you may decide to do something this week which is more daring, more bold, and that's good, but using your diplomacy, that's your real gift, and also a degree of tact, maybe even stealth, with the sun in your 12th house will be important to seize a prize as much as going for it in a very upfront and obvious way. Scorpio, your week beginning the 25th of August sees you surfing the energy of last week's powerful, potent black new moon in your sector of friendship, sociability and networking. But I don't think that's going to be your focus this week, because that 11th house can also be about aligning to our higher values, but also planning for our long term. And you're considering a lot of issues to do with your home and emotional life, but also some practicalities with Pluto and Saturn, Pluto your modern ruler, forging discordant angles to the sun. So I don't think you're going to be at liberty to be more playful. But also Mercury, the planet of communication, which has been scudding backwards and forwards in your sector of ambition, emerges from shadow just as Venus, the planet of relating, but also money, joins up with Mercury in Leo. Now, when the Sun over the last month was working its way through Leo, you may have put the feelers out, tried to get in contact with some influential folks, and you may not have heard back, and that could all be part of that long-term plan. So Venus then goes into a crunching opposition with Pluto right at the heart of this week. So although Venus can be very much about charm and persuasion, and certainly charisma in the sign of Leo, it's also asking you to consider what you really want to do, what you truly want to commit to. That's Pluto in your 4th house, because that's bringing a seismic shift to your emotional world, which will continue through to 243. So it's been edging its way in over the last 2 or 3 years for you. So I feel that the chance to be more playful, to connect to people that you like, it's there. But you may find yourself talking about your goals, your ambitions, or perhaps it's going to be people that you do work with, that you socialise around. But your traditional ruler, Mars, is still parked up in a very tender area and does forge a jarring right angle with Jupiter in a very expansive, exuberant part of your scope. So even if you do have some key conversations this week, don't try to rush the process. Mars in the 12th house can stir up lots of sediment from the past. You may find that something that's quite tender suddenly comes into the open. Take it in your stride, because even if you do find that certain friendships or alliances start to change in your world, it's really about what you want from that long term that's so critical at this key stage of the year. You can take some steps towards it. You can use diplomacy in your professional interactions. You can certainly, if you're someone who's in performance, or perhaps you have your own website, in some ways modifying that to create a more stylized view of you, certainly around your CV and any profiles you have. That would be a very smart thing to do. But those connections, I think, do need to be about that long-term bigger picture, but also those key ambitions, whether it is professionally or about where you live, how you live, and who with. Sagittarius, your week beginning the 25th of August, has seen the sun make its way right to the top of your chart and also have that very powerful black new moon in the part of your situation that's about you seizing the limelight, raising your profile, being more ambitious, and getting on the front foot when it comes to goals and ambitions. What's not to like? Well, it may be that that is an opportunity, but it's also got to feel right for you, if you like, the narrative. And because Pluto and Saturn are forging a challenging angle to the Sun at the start of this week, how you think, but also how you express yourself needs to work. So for example, if you work in a very big business, and yes, you do want more recognition, you'd like an increase, you'd like to take on more responsibility, it still has to work for you in terms of inspiring you. Because if it doesn't, you could find yourself thinking again about your work. Because Mercury has been making its way through the part of your situation to do with freedom and independence, but of course was retracing its steps in a retrograde. At the very start of this week, it's emerging from a post-retrograde shadow. If you've been waiting around a contractual matter for some information, or not quite sure on some travel plans, or you've wanted to be more spontaneous, the arrival of Venus in that area and forging a dazzling alliance with Uranus can just give you the nudge to get in touch with that part of your nature which is a free spirit. So, to summarise this week, particularly with Jupiter, your ruling planet, clashing with Mars in your sector of friendship, as much as you can have the chance to make progress around a job or an enterprise you have, it probably will require you to fit in to the expectation of the organisation that you're part of or the market you're trying to reach. And if you're much more of a natural bohemian, I feel this week gives you the opportunity to actually be a whole lot more rebellious. And if you do then start to remake your situation based more on your terms, that's not to say you can't be disciplined, you don't understand that you need to provide certain services in an efficient way. Very Virgo, I feel you get that. It's just whether you're enjoying it or not. So for example, if you do work for an enterprise where it is very, very dull, and you've always thought that you'd much rather work overseas or do something with travel or work for yourself, anything to do with internet selling or distribution, this is your opportunity to seize that moment, because you can be hugely persuasive, particularly at the heart of this week, and someone may find your message very hard to resist. Capricorn, your week beginning the 25th of August could see you uncharacteristically wanting to break out, be much more in touch with a freer part of your nature, put distance between you and some of the grinding worldly pressures that may have seemed quite oppressive of late. Perhaps it's about long-term money, perhaps it's about a property or family matter, and if you can, book a vacation or a break, even if it's for a few days, with someone you're close to. I actually think it would do you the power of good. But then reality can start to strike, because there may be a very significant financial opportunity that's going to develop for you right through to the 19th of September. At first, you may be a bit doubtful whether this can come to pass, but just be open to it. Mars is in a very powerful part of your chart just now, encouraging you to be bolder, more assertive, to do things on your terms. But this financial situation may require a delicate negotiation. It could also be that if you are drawn to someone, it may be because there's something about this person that's very sensual, or perhaps they have a slice of glamour, perhaps even are rather well off, and that could be quite alluring too. But because Mercury, the planet of communication, sure, the planet of analysis, definitely, but also the planet of business, has been going through a tangled journey since the end of June in the part of your chart to do with income and finances that are shared, anything to do with a small enterprise, or if you're trying to market something, something may have seemed rather elusive, but you could get a surprise piece of news this week, and you need to be ready for it, because that part of you that I'm describing that may just want to spin out needs to just be aware that suddenly, if you're available enough, you can seize the moment. So stay in touch. If you do have some diversions that you can enjoy whilst keeping all the basics in your world ticking over, then that's good. But do stay very much in touch with communications, because some significant developments are possible this week and over the next weeks too. So Aquarius, your week beginning the 25th of August, sees the Sun, newly arrived in Virgo, conflicted by both your ruling planets. Saturn in Aries, Uranus in Gemini, but also Pluto in your sign. It's not in a great angle with the Sun either. What does this mean? Well, the 8th house can be where we're most invested. That can be spiritually, psychologically, romantically, intimately, or financially. But I feel that the energy of those other players is asking you to stay very much in touch with your individual purpose, particularly with Pluto, how you think, but also expressing yourself in a very unique way with Uranus now in your 5th house through to the end of the first week of November. So the Sun's journey into Virgo is not necessarily going to be without some challenges. However, Mercury, the planet of communication and the ruler of your second decan, does emerge from a very tense 10-week period on Monday, comes out of its post-retrograde shadow, but is also joined by the beautiful Venus in your sector of relating. So as much as the Sun's asking you to dive deep to really evaluate the purpose and the motives of all sorts of connections, what Venus and Mercury can do is actually help you to get the communication going. Because at the end of the day, if that's flowing, it helps us to relax, and then we make better decisions and we can assess things in a less challenging way. Ironically, however, Venus does go face to face with Pluto at the heart of this week. But that could be that you're about to encounter someone who could have a radical impact upon you. It doesn't have to be a romantic relationship. It could be someone who you perceive as being very magnetic, very influential, and you could feel a little bit enthralled to them. But keep in touch with your value, your self-worth. But what Venus and Mercury are telling you this week is that if you can seek to connect rather than cut off, because the 8th house can be where we go all in, but it can be where we come all out. Delay coming all out on a situation which has been a little bit turbulent. Give yourself a little bit more space, because with Uranus, your modern ruler, forging an awesome link to Venus and also Saturn too, a conversation you have this week could soon see some of the tensions earlier in the week make way for something so much more constructive. And then later in the week, Mars, which is in a very freedom-loving part of your situation, is in a challenging right angle with Jupiter. It can give you a surplus of physical energy, but also a bit resentful of fitting into anyone else's needs. But that's where the diplomacy of Venus in the 7th house can be so good. And even if you don't make a connection with someone this week, I can almost guarantee in whatever way you will make a very significant connection by the 19th of September. Pisces, your week beginning the 25th of August, makes me think of that dazzling conjunction between your traditional ruler Jupiter, but also Venus, the planet of love, on the 12th of August. That hadn't happened in the sign of Cancer, which for you is your 5th house of playfulness, sociability, romance, creativity. That hasn't happened since 2002, 2003, so a very, very long time. So that may have given you some uplift to be more playful, but you have had a practical energy for some time with the Sun in Leo, but also Mercury retracing its steps there as well. Now, the sun last week moved into your sector relating. We had the new moon, so you could set your intentions for all the positive things you'd like around all sorts of interactions over the next month. And Venus, the relator, then moves to join with Mercury in the sign of Leo, but that's very practical too. So what do we make of all of this? Particularly because Pluto and Saturn and Uranus are all feeding into that sun position at the start of this week. Well, I feel if you're not enjoying a relationship, it could be a quite testing week, to be honest. You may have to really think carefully about what you gain from that involvement. Now, the relationship it concerned could be who you work with, who you work for. It could be people who work for you. It may not necessarily be in a romantic dimension, although it certainly can be. But if you're feeling that there's difficult energies, things feel restless, you feel there's some psychological tensions around situations, you don't feel that people are being quite as open and transparent as they might be, then I feel that although Venus moving into the 6th house encourages you to do your best to fulfill your obligations and duties, if you're not feeling it in a particular relationship, because Mars is in the part of your chart which can be to do with very strong physical attractions and desires, but also endings, clashing with your ruler later this week, you could either find yourself drawn towards someone you don't really like but find irresistible. You may find an old flame come into mind and find it difficult to get them out of your thoughts. Or it may be you could meet someone who's a really good person and very positive for you, and that could be right through to the 19th of September. But I feel it will need to be a relationship which doesn't have the baggage. Everybody has history. You know, when people say, I have no baggage, everybody has a history. And all of us can find at times that that history can come up and affect us in ways through like the taste of food or smells, or if we hear a particular album track, they can really trigger our senses. So I feel that you may need to be very much in touch with, yes, we all would like equilibrium, but also it's important sometimes to steer away from certain involvements if it keeps us free to then be available for the right connection. But if you are really experiencing a bumpy time, and however much you try, it's difficult for the other person to appreciate what you're offering, I feel that you could be reconsidering that involvement this week.